Hi, I'm Pete Krause, and today we're going to learn how to play Black Angel, but with the solo player rules. This video just focuses on the solo player differences as compared with a multiplayer game. So if you're not familiar with Black Angel, there's a couple really good videos by Rahdo Runs Through and Game in a Nutshell that'll teach you thoroughly how to play. Once you know this, come back here and then I'll show you how to play the game solo for when your friends aren't around. Similar to the multiplayer game of Black Angel, you get to take on the role of an AI system which oversees the ship the Black Angel as it progresses on its 1,000-year mission through space. Just like the multiplayer game, the game ends after the Black Angel reaches the planet Spes, or the game ends when the Ravager deck runs out of cards. Playing with the solo player rules of this game, you get to play against another AI system of your opponent, both in the meta sense and in reality. And what I love about this is that your opponent's name is fittingly called Hal. After you set up the Black Angel board, place 4 dice of each color in the corresponding dice supply areas. The rest of the dice can go back in the box as they won't be needed when playing the solo player game. You only need 5 of the 7 spaceboard strips. These get assembled the same way they would for the multiplayer game, where it doesn't really matter which side is up or which side is down. Leave the 2 unused strips back in the box. The next difference for the solo player game is with the Ravager deck. Shuffle these, then remove 12 cards from the deck. The cards that you remove go back in the box. Same as with the multiplayer game, 2 of these get placed on the Black Angel board. When you choose a player color for Hal, all you need are 2 markers of his color and his robots. In this case, we chose red for Hal. Hal won't get a player board or anything that goes on his player board, so his setup is pretty easy. Just place one of Hal's markers on the 5-point space on the victory point track, and place the other to mark his player compartment. Place Hal's robots in the break room. So you're technically supposed to put all of Hal's robots in the break room, but I messed up and only put 5 in there when I shot most of the footage for this. Whether you play with all of Hal's robots in the break room or not, just remember, unlike you, Hal can produce robots at any time he wants to in the game, whereas you only start with 5 in the break room. Then place 1 robot of Hal's in each of the 3 workstations. Next, take 1 die for each robot in a workstation and roll them for both you, and then roll 3 for Hal. Finally, Hal doesn't have any mission cards or Ravager cards. So in the solo player game, you will always be the first player. So take the player card number 1. And unfortunately, there's no bonus of goodies like you get for being player 2, 3, or 4, like in a multiplayer game. So, sorry. So let's take a look at how Hal works. After you complete either a turn sequence A or turn sequence B turn, you will then take Hal's turn for him. He always takes a turn sequence A turn if he has dice to play in his compartment. Otherwise, if he's out of dice, he takes a turn sequence B turn. But one thing important to keep in mind is that you and Hal will not always be taking the same turn sequence at the same time. Sometimes Hal takes a turn sequence A, you take a turn sequence B. Sometimes you're in sync and take the same turn sequence. Sometimes you'll take a turn sequence B, he'll take a turn sequence A. You get the idea. Hal's turns are also a bit simpler. For his turn sequence A, you'll just draw a Hal deck card for him, and he'll perform one of the actions from this card. For Hal's turn sequence B turn, you'll re-roll his dice and advance the Black Angel for him on the spaceboard. Anytime Hal collects any goods, like ships, resources, cards, technology tiles, or debris cubes, these get converted right away into victory points for Hal, using the table provided on the backs of the Hal deck cards. Next, let's take a look at how Hal works for turn sequence A. So remember, if Hal still has a die in his player compartment, he takes a turn sequence A. Otherwise, he would have to take a turn sequence B. So for our example, Hal has 2 dice in his player compartment. So what you do for Hal here is you start by drawing one of his cards from what I like to call the Hal deck and flip this card over. If you just finished a turn sequence A turn for your last turn, you look at the top of this card first. However, if you just finished a turn sequence B turn on your last turn, you look at the bottom of this card first, noted by the little A and the B. So since we just finished a turn sequence A, we'll start by trying to take the action on the top of this card first. So for our card here, it's a green command ships action. The cards don't have the number of the action from the Black Angel board, but they include the same graphical icon from the actions. When Hal takes an action, you first have to select a die for him. What Hal does when he looks for a die, or what you will do for him, is he always looks for the highest value die matching the color of the action. So our action color is green here. And it doesn't matter if that die is in his compartment or yours. So in this case, he's got a 1, and he's going to look at this 3 and say, this is the highest value die. And this is the die that Hal's going to want. Then Hal buys that die from you. You would take one resource from the supply and add it to the resource compartment on your player board. If both you and Hal have a die with the highest value matching the color of the action, Hal will use his die. So in this case, we both have 3, so Hal would use his die with the value of 3. So if I remove the green dice, what would happen in this situation? Neither of us has a die matching the color of the action. If that is the case, then look at the action on the bottom of the card and try to see if there's a die available to resolve that action. In this case, there's not. So if neither you or Hal has a die of the color matching the top or the bottom action, which typically happens at some point during my solo games, then Hal doesn't take an action this turn, but moves a die of the third color from his player compartment back to the supply, and then he gains 3 victory points. But most of the time you will get to perform an action for Hal, and when you do, one other thing to keep in mind is that you always resolve his actions in a way that would make him the most victory points. To feel good about a victory in a solo game, you have to be strict with the rules. Okay, so you have a die for Hal. He's going to buy mine, and I took the resource. So next, go to the action location on the Black Angel board. This is action 5, command your ships green, which matches turn sequence A on Hal's card. So when you take an action for Hal, reduce the value on his die by 1 if the action's damaged, meaning the action would have to have 2 damage cubes, just the same as it would be for you on your turn. But when it comes to Ravager cards, the one that would make Hal discard a mission card, a Ravager card, or lock one of his robots away would have no impact on him. The only Ravager cards that would impact Hal are these two. The one that would make Hal add a damage cube to a die in the supply, or the one that would make Hal add a damage cube to the next action clockwise. Since there's no Ravagers on this step, there's no effect for Hal. So he has a value of 3 on his die. The command your ships action for Hal is a bit simpler than it is for you. Hal doesn't have to worry about moving ships, and the value of the die doesn't matter. You just draw 1 card for Hal of the same color as the action, in this case green. If the card is a neutralization mission card, which this one is, it has the red arrows pointing down near the center of the card. Place it on a hex of the same color on the first strip of the space board. This is the strip that is closest to the Black Angel board. And you can see that I would be able to play my card here for Hal, since it has a symbol and color matching. If there were no hexes available of that green color, then you'd place that card on the hex of the same color on the second strip, and so on. If the strip has 2 available hexes where you could play the card, like here and here, place the card on the hex with the comet, which we see the comet right here. And Hal instantly gets 3 additional bonus points if he plays a card on these hexes. Definitely something you may want to pay attention to with your strategy against Hal. Comets really work in Hal's favor. Now, let's just do a what if. What if this card that Hal drew was an activation mission card? As a reminder, these are the cards showing the die faces in the lower left side as seen here. So if Hal drew an activation mission, then you would place the activation mission card on a hex of the same color on the 5th or farthest strip from the Black Angel board. In this case, I have 2 locations where Hal could play this card. Since this one has a comet, Hal would play his activation mission on the comet space and then instantly take 3 victory points. If there were no available places to play on this last strip, then Hal would look at the fourth strip and find a place to play his card, either here or here, and he would choose this space because it has a comet. In either case, if the card Hal played was a neutralization mission card or an activation mission card, you would finish Hal's turn similar to what you did for your turn. You place one of Hal's robots on the reward and he gains it, in this case 2 victory points, and then move his marker up the victory point track. After you place a card for Hal, you then draw and place any Ravager cards on the Black Angel board. So in this case, 1 Ravager would appear, so Hal would draw 1 Ravager, or you would draw it for him, and resolve that card. So this Ravager is going to attack action 1 and place 1 damage cube on action 1. And then we finally place technology tiles as shown in the upper left-hand corner of the card. So in this case, 1 green tile and 1 gray tile. After you place technology tiles for Hal, then move his die that he played for the action into the supply, and then put his card in the discard pile. Let's look at how the other actions work for Hal. If Hal can take a Discover Technology action on his turn, like we see on this card, then you would look closely at this symbol on Hal's card. If the symbol looks like this and shows an Advanced Technology tile and a Standard Technology tile, then Hal would buy tiles from the display. So for our example, if his die has a 3, and since his card allows him to buy both Advanced Technology tiles and Standard Technology tiles, he would buy 1 Advanced Technology tile and then a 1-cost Standard Technology tile. If his die has a 2, then he would just buy an Advanced Technology tile. If Hal's die was a 1, then he just buys a 1-cost Standard tile. And of course, if his die was a star, he wouldn't buy anything. But if this is the case, Hal just instantly gains 3 victory points. As you'll see with many of Hal's actions, he will gain victory points, typically 3, if he can't perform the action on his turn, and it makes it tough for you to beat him. If the small symbol on Hal's card was just of a Standard Technology tile only, like we see here, then he buys only the standard tiles, and he would buy as many as he could, so if he had a value of 3, he would buy a 2-cost and a 1-cost. For all tiles Hal buys, Advanced or Standard, he always buys the tile that is closest to where the tiles get ejected, as marked by these 2 red arrows for standard tiles, and then buys the advanced tile that is closest to the standard tile display first. The difference here is that when playing with Hal, along with immediately filling the advanced technology tile, you first have to shift the remaining tiles and then add your tile to the display. This way Hal isn't always taking just the new tile that was added, possibly on his next turn. Remember that once Hal acquires a tile, convert it immediately to victory points for him. A standard tile is worth 2 points for Hal, an advanced tile is worth 4 points for Hal, and if Hal's die is 0, which is the star, then Hal automatically gets 3 victory points. After you convert Hal's technology tiles into victory points, remember to put Hal's die back in the supply, and then it would be your turn. If Hal performs a Destroy Ravagers action, Hal destroys 1 Ravager card equal to the value on his die. Hal's card indicates the order in which he does this, indicated by the circular arrow icon. If this arrow turns clockwise, then Hal would destroy Ravagers starting from the action location 1 and working his way to action location 6. If this arrow would turn counterclockwise, then Hal would start destroying Ravagers from action 6 and start working his way back to action 1. Hal always tries to destroy as many Ravager cards as his die allows. If an action has more Ravagers on it than the value of his die, he will skip this action and go to the next. This is the same as when you destroy Ravagers as well. Hal's card shows that he's going to destroy Ravagers in a clockwise fashion. That means he would start from action number 1 and work his way to action 6. So going back to the board, we would need to select a green die. Hal's die has a higher value than mine, so Hal would select his die and put it on the action. The action is not damaged, nor does it have any Ravager cards, so Hal can perform this action with a value of 2 and activate it twice. He would come over here to Action Station 1, and he sees that there's 2 ravagers. Since he has a value of 2, he could destroy both of those, and then he would exchange these for victory points. Each one of these is worth 2, so I would advance his victory point marker 4. Let's say Hal had a value of 1 on his turn, and we had the same scenario. Hal would start with Action 1. He would not be able to remove all of them, since his die value of 1 would only let him remove one of these. So he has to move clockwise to the next one. This has 2, so he wouldn't be able to remove any from Action 2. Then he moves to Action 4, and he would be able to remove the single Ravager card because his die value is 1. If Hal has a die value of 3, then he could remove these 2, and he has 1 left. He wouldn't be able to remove these 2 all at the same time, so he'd continue to move on, and then he could remove 1 more from Action 4. Then you'd convert all of these into victory points for Hal at 2 victory points each, so he would gain 6. Then his die would go back into the supply, and then it would be your turn. Oh yeah, if Hal's die has a value of 0, which is the star, or a damaged action reduces his die to a value of 0, Hal just gains 3 victory points. So then the last action we look at for Hal is the Repair the Black Angel action. If Hal performs a Repair the Black Angel action, Hal destroys 1 damage cube equal to the value on his die. Similar to the Destroy Ravager action, Hal's card indicates the order in which he does this with the circular arrow icon. If this arrow turns clockwise, then Hal would remove damage cubes starting from action location 1 and working his way to action 6. If this arrow turns counterclockwise, then Hal would start removing damage cubes from action 6 and start working his way back to action 1. Hal will also remove damage cube from damaged dice, only if there are no damage cubes anywhere else. So in this example, Hal has a die with a value of 1, it's gray, which matches the color of the action, and I have a die with a value of 2, so Hal would give me 1 resource and buy this die. He'd put the die on this action, or you would do it for him, and then Hal would repair damage. Since the arrow on his action shows that he removes damage cubes in a counterclockwise fashion, he would start with action 6 and work his way backwards. What Hal does with his die value of 2 is he'd be able to activate this action 2 times and remove 2 damage cubes. Action 6 has none, so he works backwards to 5 and would remove both of these damage cubes. He then would exchange these 2 damage cubes for 2 victory points each for Hal, and advance his marker 4. If the value of Hal's die was a 1, then you'd start from action 6, it has none, you'd move to action 5, and remove the damage cube off of damage space number 2, and that would make the action undamaged. Then exchange this damage cube for 2 victory points and add that to Hal's victory point track. Same with Hal's other actions. If his die has a value of 0, which is a star, or Hal is unable to perform the action because there are no damage cubes, or a damage action reduces his die to a value of 0, Hal just gains 3 victory points. At the end of this action, just remember to put Hal's die back in the supply, and his turn is over. Now that we know how Hal works for turn sequence A, let's take a look at how he works for turn sequence B. When it's Hal's turn and he's out of dice in his player compartment, then you have to take a turn sequence B for Hal. Here's how it works. First, you re-roll Hal's dice. And by the way, Hal never adds new robots to any of his workstations, so you always just take 1 die of each color and then roll them. Don't worry about locking away dice in the high security area for Hal, as Hal doesn't have this option. Next, Hal doesn't have a player board, so you don't have to worry about resetting a player board for Hal, so you just move on to advancing the Black Angel board. When you advance the Black Angel closer to the planet Spez, do this in the exact same way you do on your turn. The only exception is that any cards that Hal owns that get ejected give him 3 victory points each. And it doesn't matter whether these are neutralization mission cards or activation mission cards. And it doesn't matter what's on the card, they all just give Hal 3 victory points each. The same rule applies when you advance the Black Angel on your turn as well. The cards that you eject for Hal just get discarded. However, Hal's robots go back into the break room. Okay, we know how to take a turn sequence A for Hal and turn sequence B, but here's a couple things that you have to keep in mind when you take your turn. When you select a die for an action and buy a die from Hal for 1 resource, he instantly converts this resource into 1 victory point. Keep that in mind. During your turn sequence B, after you roll your dice, if you decide to pay 1 resource to put a die in the high security area, in the solo game, that works just like the multiplayer game. Hal will not be able to touch that die during his turn. When you activate an activation mission card that belongs to Hal, where his robot's in the little owner space, he always takes an activation if he can. And this would mean, like in a card where you have resources that Hal can collect, he will instantly take 1 activation and convert those resources into victory points. Now keep in mind, there are some activation mission cards that Hal can't take. If he has to convert resources to get victory points, Hal would not be able to take those. At the end of the game, you finish adding up your victory points the same way you do for the multiplayer game. And there's nothing else you need to add up for Hal. However many points he has on his final turn is all he gets. After you're done figuring your victory points, compare them with Hal's, and whoever has the most wins. And whoever loses is the AI system that gets shut down. So that's it for Black Angel. Thank you so much for watching. If you like learning solo rules and you like being able to play your games when your friends aren't around, make sure to refer these videos to your friends, and then also remember to like and subscribe. Thanks again, and see you next time.